Okay, so in my last video, I was talking about this big job where we replaced the strut mounts, the tie rods, the ball joints, and I guess I had intended for it to be a tutorial of sorts, but I didn't really film it as that. And I just want to give a lot of shout out to those who do full car tutorial videos, because they are hard to do. I mean, car repairs are hard enough, especially out here in the heat. I mean, it is sweltering hot, and the mosquitoes and the frustration and all that. So this can be kind of a general overview of things that I've done to the car recently that maybe I may or may not have talked about. Obviously, we got new strut mounts, and we see these Toyota mounts, and you could see the originals. They all have this little painted dot that points towards the outside. It seems like the driver's side has a blue dot, and then the passenger side has a white dot. Hopefully I put them on the wrong way. I did check the part numbers, and I believe I have them on the right way, because they're unique but very, very similar. Other things here that we see that are new have this new wire connector. I did a series, you see new wire connector there. It's called the female electrical housing, and those are pretty easy to replace. Another thing is getting these electrical connectors. This is new from Toyota. I used to have like some advanced auto ones, and those had disintegrated. They're made out of like some really soft metal, really kind of terrible. So glad to have those. We got the reservoirs changed. We see where this level's at. I think I'd recently topped it off to like here. When I put it back, we have the new power steering fluid wet reservoir. That's looking good. New radiator hose cap. Here we have a couple of those new connectors. There's this little black clip down there which had broken, obviously, and I was using a zip tie, but then in one of my orders I just threw it in there. It was maybe like $1 or $2. So we have that little clip. New alternator, new remanufactured alternator with also a new connector and this new little cover because it had broken, so that's looking good. There we have the transmission cooler still going strong. You can see on my channel when I talked about installing that. There's the filter and the coolers down there. It's working well. I mean, we'll see if the transmission lasts. It's coming up on a its first transmission fluid change since it got rebuilt, so maybe I'll do a video about that. Another new connector there. So this engine bay is really starting to look like original OEM. I mean, because I remember seeing some pictures of, you know, what these cars, and a lot of them is those reservoirs that they don't have the yellow aged look, and then obviously the strut mounts looking good. So I'm really liking how this looks. So the verdict with the repair, it does feel pretty good. It does feel pretty tight. I have not gotten it aligned because there's still the clunk on the passenger side, and I'm not sure what it is, but what I am going to do is I'm going to replace the sway bar link. So I have the driver's side wheel up, and what I'm doing here is two things. One is I'm going to tighten this tie rod nut, since I'm not getting aligned just yet. Obviously you should align it, but I'm not, because I want to do it all at once. So, and I have these old tires on here anyways, and I've driven it, and it drives pretty good. It drives actually straight. It drives straighter than it did before. Now, does that mean it's aligned? No, obviously not. But I'm going to replace these sway bar links. I think that wouldn't affect the alignment, but I just don't want to take any chances. So I'm going to keep the old tires on. I ordered the new sway bar links from Amayama, and we're going to see, you know, if that deals with the clunk. If it doesn't, I guess I'm just going to live with it, you know, unless I can really figure out what it is. But here is the sequence of doing everything. You know, obviously get the car up. Don't use scissor jacks like me. Definitely a dangerous proposition. But then once you get it up, I would recommend take apart the whole brake caliper. It's these two 17mm bolts on the back. You see them there. Well, take off the brake caliper here, then take off the what they call the torque plate and kind of put that to the side. Take off the speed sensor with that little 10mm bolt, get that out of the way. Take off this bolt for the sway bar link, get all that out of the way, undo the ball joint. So we see under there, you got some new hardware with the new ball joint, so that all looks real good. Then, you know, break loose these strut mount bolts, and then, you know, take the whole knuckle off. That really makes it easier. Then once you have that off, you're gonna take off that that little dust shield. You just put a little, you know, screwdriver, pry bar, and that pops right out. I had done this before, so it wasn't too hard. If you've never taken them off, it may be harder. And then you'll take the strut off, you know, just undo the 3 bolts here, take that off, and then you'll have that wide open hub there. Then you can screw on, oh, obviously take off the old outer tie rod. And then I did the thing where I took off the boot, you know, checked if there's any fluid there, just cleaned out the boot, put it back on. Then I did the fluid. I drained the fluid by disconnecting the hose down there. We'll go over that a little more. I disconnected the hose, drained the fluid. You know, once the fluid drained, I, you know, turned the wheel lock to lock, lets all the fluid come out. Then I tried to find a place for that magnifying filter. I could not find a place for it, so I didn't install the magnifying filter. I just put the new reservoir and did put new hoses. I replaced that hose down there with new clamps, kind of hard to see right down there, that with new clamps. I replaced that hose right there with new clamps. I replaced that clamp. That hose is relatively new and it's fine. And then I replaced the hose down at the bottom once I buttoned all that back up. And to get to there, I took off the 2 fans, just 2 bolts up top here. Whew, that's hot. And 2 bolts here plus a bolt at the bottom. So that gave me access to that hose right there. Then I filled it back up with fluid, and without turning the car on, I just turned it lock to lock. It felt kind of weird, but then I actually bled it in 3 stages. So I bled it in the first stage when the steering rack wasn't attached to anything. It was just not even the outer tie rods. Then I put it back together to like this assembly, and I turned it lock to lock, and that actually worked a bit different, and it actually pushed more air. I think there's something with the valve, you know, right in the steering rack where it needs a certain amount of tension to actually open that valve from each side. So if you just have the rack by itself, you're actually not getting fluid into the cavity. I mean, I don't know, that's just my guess, but when the tie rod wasn't connected and I was turning it lock to lock, it felt a little weird. I mean, it was going back and forth, but then once I got everything back together and I did the same thing lock to lock with the car off, there was big bubbles coming up in the reservoir. So make sure to do that if you're bleeding the power steering fluid. That bleeding it without it connected, it's not going to work. You need to at least have that. It doesn't need to be on the ground on the wheel, but I guess the tension of it turning that is enough for it to open that valve or whatever, for a lot of air to come through. It used just about the whole quart of fluid. I did spill some when I initially poured it in. I don't know, I just wasn't paying attention or whatever, and it like overflowed, so I did lose a little bit, but 1 quart of fluid has now filled it up. We see to the current level. I mean, the car's been on, it's been driven, it works fine, but you want to make sure that you do bleed it, you know, first when the car is off with it connected, so there is that tension on it, and then turn the car on, go lock to lock, make sure there's no bubbles, get it up to the right level, and that's that. The next thing that I did So day one was taking everything apart, getting the new fluid in. Day two, I had the shocks and strut off. At the end of day one, I put those ball joints on, and you can see that in the last video, in part one, we'll call it. Day two, it was getting these struts and putting the strut mounts on. Now, that's where you're dealing with those spring compressors. You can go to your Advanced Auto and get the spring compressors. A lot of people are afraid of them. I understand why. I've done it a few times now, so it's not as scary for me. Obviously, you want to be careful, you want to respect it, and I mean, it is just, you're going to be hurting your hands and your arms doing it, because there's a lot of pressure that you gotta just keep turning, and I had to do it multiple times to get it to line up. So there's the way this all lines up. You see the little seam there on the boot, that's supposed to line up exactly with the out position. So where these things are, you know, where it points out, and if we go up, that seam is pointed out, and that actually lines up there with the what they call the seat, and it has like an out arrow, and then this boot thing has an out arrow, and that all has to line up. And you know, when you're decompressing the spring, sometimes it shifts, so you think you have it lined up, then it doesn't, and you see here there's like a hole here, so that hole is what you're kind of lining it up with, because that's where it points out. So I had to compress and then decompress the spring a few times until I finally got it right. I mean, I was probably a little OCD, it probably could be a little bit off, but it is what it is. And also another note with the ball joint, the castle nut, you know, it's a castle nut, so there's this hole that you're supposed to put the cotter pin in. So for not this one, but for the passenger side one, you know, once it got down to torque, the castle nut wasn't lined up with the hole. So I was like, do I loosen it or do I tighten it? And a cursory search online came up with that tightening is the better option, because you don't want to loosen it, because that could ruin the tension that it has for the taper or whatever. So I actually tightened it. This one was actually fine. This one actually lined up right on the torque, but the passenger side one, I had to almost go the full notch to get it to line up. If you have a different opinion about that, but it kind of made more sense to me to over tighten it a little bit than to loosen it and do it. So I tightened it and got that cotter pin on. And actually what I'm doing right now, while I have it up, it's not just for you guys for the video, is I'm actually going to get the cotter pin in on the axle. So let me do that. I wanted to tighten down that tie rod, the little adjustment bolt, the nut, and then I want to get the cotter pin in here so that this is nice and secure. So here's what goes on this axle nut. I mean, these are just cotter pins from Advanced Auto, and but before that you have to put on this little crown. Maybe it has a better name, but kind of looks like a crown to me. So let's line this up. Oh, even that one doesn't really line up. Oh, that kind of lines up. I like this method with the crown. Look at that, lines up beautifully. All right, so let's get one of these cotter pins. I think this shorter one will work. Let's see. Oh no, that nearly goes through. Maybe one of these bigger ones. Oh my god, both of these kind of just go through. These just kind of go through. Okay, here's my little goofy cotter pin job. This is why, man, fucking Dorman. I mean, I guess it's my fault for not getting the right size, but I was debating getting it from the Toyota dealership, but just the time and the hassle, I was like, well, let me just get a cotter pin on there for safety. But I may just order the Toyota cotter pins, and next time I'm in here, put those on, because Jesus. But that should hold, that shouldn't go anywhere. And that that'll do for now. Just before I put this wheel back up, another thing I did was replace these lower control mount bushings. Obviously the control arm is the same. I just bought the bushings and took it to a machine shop and had them pressed out, and the new one's pressed in. Definitely cheaper than getting a whole arm, and I mean the arm itself is just metal, so that should be fine. And there's so it's those bushings, which I think rarely go bad, and then those bushings that almost always go bad, and mine were pretty cracked and messed up. So pretty much all the rubber here is brand new. Here's the passenger side, and here's what I believe the Clunk is. Now again, I may be wrong. I was wrong initially with this whole thing, but this sway bar bushing with my hand, or sway bar end link, see, I can turn it, and you see there's like a bit of separation there. Let's see if I can turn it. I don't think I'm supposed to be able to turn this by hand. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not, I don't know. I'm gonna replace these anyways. If the Clunk's still there, at least I'll be comfortable knowing that I have all Toyota parts. Everything else looks good here, but yeah, there's again that being lined up the right way, the seam, but I think it's these sway bar links. I think the bushings are fine. I'm replacing those anyways. They were like $7 a pop, and I may take the sway bar out just so it's easier, because it's kind of hard to get to that nut right there, especially to torque it down. So yeah, I'll do a video when I get those, but I'm pretty sure, and we'll see if that solves the Clunk. It's really like Clunk. It only happens sometimes. It feels like it happens when the passenger side dips, so when it goes and it's dipping more, which, you know, that articulation would kind of make sense. There you can see the new power steering line right there. You can see the power steering pump, nice and dry. Fun story, so the pump that was on this car leaked like you cannot believe. This is actually from an RX 300 from the junkyard, put on in 22, and so far it's held up pretty good. I tried rebuilding mine with like the seals, and that didn't work. It leaked even worse, but this, fingers crossed, has actually worked out pretty good. The only leak has been from the rack, and here's a cute little kitty. Yeah, so we'll see if the sway bar links, and I got the front and rear. I just bit the bullet. We're gonna have all Toyota parts on here. The only thing that aren't, ironically enough, are these control arm bushings. Toyota doesn't sell the bushings by themselves, but you know, that's fine. I mean, maybe the new bushings is what's clunking, I don't know. But like I said, we'll replace the sway bar, and if the Clunk's still there, I'm just gonna live with it. I'll at least know that I have quality parts on here and everything's buttoned down pretty good. Okay, so here's everything buttoned up. We have the cotter pin. This was tightened. We will see if the hello kitty, you're so cute. Hi. We will see if the new sway bar links fix that Clunk. If not, the saga continues. But we have new fluid, new reservoirs, lots of new good stuff, new strut mounts, looking good. All right, she's back on all her wheels. We can see the fluid level here, coolant, power steering fluid, and always remember to torque down your wheels. We got 76 foot-pounds. We're gonna do that all around, and even though she needs an alignment, she drives okay. So we're gonna wait for those sway bar links to come in, and then hopefully she'll be buttoned up and At least suspension work wise, none of that won't be needed for a long time. So I want to finish on kind of like a general update. So I'm about 1,400 miles from the last oil change. And here's the oil level. I haven't added any oil. It seems like this car burns or uses or loses in one way or another about a quart of oil every 5,000 miles. So that's not bad. And let's give it a quick wipe down. So that's the color of the oil. Again, we're about 1,400 miles since the last oil change. So it does pretty good. It used to leak a lot more through these the cam and crank seals, but I think I've pretty much squared those away. I think it loses a little bit through the cam timing sensors, cam position sensors right down there. You see it's a little wet. I replaced that sensor, or the female electrical housing, but obviously that wouldn't fix the leak. It's probably just the old O-ring on that sensor, but it does really good with oil. Coolant, I've been a little concerned that the level in the reservoir has gone down. I've had to add some. I mean, I don't see any leaks anywhere. Obviously the oil's not getting milky or anything, but other than that, this car has just over 211,000 miles. Perhaps a bit more, because there was a time where the odometer would like shut off, so it wasn't counting all the miles. But let's call it 211. And yeah, really good on oil. You know, once the timing belt job was done, which it needed to get done anyways, replace those cam and crank seals. If I get to the next timing belt job, I'll probably just replace those seals again. I mean, it makes no sense to not do it if you're already in there. It's a few bucks for those seals. It's just taking off those covers. I saw a video where some guy was doing a timing belt on the same engine, the 1MZ, and he's said, oh, to get to the water pump, you know, it's really hard because this metal cover like blocks some of it. So what I do is I cut through the cover. And it's like, I mean, first you should be taking it off anyways to just replace the seal. I mean, unless you're only trying to keep this car for a few months, but take the cover off. It's not that big of a deal. And then replace the seals behind it and do the job right. I mean, yeah. Yeah, but lovely car, aside from the transmission. But hopefully with the cooler, I mean, I think this car, any of the V6s that came with this transmission should have come with this Toyota designed cooler to begin with, and that may have saved a lot of people a lot of hassle, especially the Lexus, which is supposed to be the higher end version. I mean, we'll see. I do see an objective change in the temperature, that the transmission fluid temperature now never goes beyond the coolant temperature, and the coolant temperature gets up to like 203 degrees at its highest. So the transmission fluid temperature is pretty much regulated there. And let's do a transmission fluid check. Now obviously you're supposed to check this when it's warm and it's running, but we'll do a quick little check just as is. So this is with it off. It's warm, but probably nowhere near operating temperature. That's at a good level. And here's like the color of the fluid. Pretty good. Again, in the next 5,000 miles or so, well, probably the next oil change, so in a little over 3,000 miles, we're going to do a drain and fill and replace the both filters, both this one that I put there and the one under the pan. Probably a little soon for the magnifying, but I have it already. I'm going to use the one that I was going to use on the steering system, but couldn't. And we'll replace the one in the pan and see the how the magnets and everything are. So I think that's all I have for this video. Thanks for watching.